In the annals of history, few figures loom as large as Charlemagne, a warrior, a scholar, a ruler, Aenope's destiny. But who was Charlemagne beyond the myth? Was he a benevolent king who spread learning and faith, or a ruthless conqueror who bent nations to his will? What drove him to wage relentless wars, forge powerful alliances, and ultimately be crowned Emperor of the Romans? His story is not just that of a king. It is the tale of a world in transition, where the echoes of Rome still whispered and the dawn of medieval Europe. A visionary. He was a man who carved an empire from chaos and reshaped Europe began to rise. Step into the tumultuous age of the 8th century and witness the making of a legend. The air was thick with the scent of burning torches and the whisper of fate. In the year 747 AD, under the looming shadow of a fractured kingdom, a child was born who would change the course of history. His name was Karl, the son of Pepin the Short, the ambitious and calculating ruler who had seized the throne of the Franks. Yet Karl's destiny was far greater than mere inheritance. It was one of conquest, transformation, and legend. The Frankish kingdom, though powerful, was anything but stable. Warlords vied for power, rival clans plotted in the shadows, and the distant echoes of Rome's once mighty empire still lingered. Karl grew up in a world of danger and intrigue, where every decision could mean the rise or fall of a dynasty. His father's bold move, overthrowing the last Merovingian king with the blessing of the Pope, set the stage for a new order, one that would demand strength, intelligence, and an unbreakable will. From an early age, Karl was trained in the arts of war and governance, molded not just as a prince but as a future ruler who would one day command armies, forge alliances, and stamp his name upon the world. The boy who had once roamed the halls of his father's court with curious eyes would grow to become a man of unmatched ambition. But before he could wield the sword of empire, he had to survive the trials of power, for the path to greatness is never without peril. The death of a king is often the birth of a storm, and in 768 the Frankish kingdom trembled with uncertainty. Pepin the Short was gone, and in his place stood two sons, Karl and Carloman. Their inheritance was a fractured empire, split between them like a contested prize. Karl, bold and unyielding, sought unity and dominance. Carloman, cautious and hesitant, saw shadows of betrayal everywhere. Their rivalry simmered beneath the surface, each step toward power a delicate dance between alliance and destruction. Without hesitation, Karl seized the moment. Before Carloman's widow and sons could stake their claim, he took control of his brother's lands, unifying the kingdom under his iron will. Rivals vanished, dissenters were crushed, and the murmurs of rebellion were silenced by the weight of his growing legend. No longer a prince sharing power, Karl had become something far more dangerous, a single ruler, unchallenged and unbound. But this was only the beginning. The world beyond Frankish borders was restless, and Karl had no intention of standing idle. A new era of conquest was dawning, and the warrior prince was ready to claim his destiny with fire and steel. The land of the Saxons was a world apart. Untamed forests, warrior tribes, and gods that whispered in the wind. For years, these fierce pagans had defied Frankish rule, raiding Christian lands and shattering the fragile peace. To Charlemagne, they were more than mere enemies. They were an obstacle to divine order, a challenge to be broken. And so began one of the bloodiest conflicts of his reign, a war that would stretch over 3 decades. Each battle was a test of endurance, each campaign a struggle between faith and fury. The Saxons, led by their indomitable leader Widukind, fought with savage desperation, striking from the shadows, melting into the forests only to rise again. No treaty held, no surrender lasted. They were like ghosts, unseen, unpredictable, unyielding. But Charlemagne was relentless. He burned their villages, crushed their warriors, and imposed a brutal rule. In 782, after yet another rebellion, he issued a decree that sent shockwaves through Europe, the massacre of Verdun. 4,000 Saxons were executed in a single day, their defiance drowned in blood. It was a message to all who resisted, submission or destruction. Still, the Saxons rose. Still, Widukind defied him. The war dragged on, years turning into decades. But the Franks pressed forward, unwavering, until at last in 785, Widukind stood before Charlemagne and accepted baptism. It was more than a surrender. It was a transformation, the moment when an ancient way of life crumbled before the might of a new empire. While Charlemagne fought in the north, storm clouds gathered over Italy. The Lombards, proud and defiant, cast their gaze upon Rome with dangerous intent. Pope Adrian III, desperate and outmatched, sent an urgent plea to the only man who could stand against them, Charlemagne. Seizing the opportunity, Charlemagne rode south with an army of steel and fury. The Lombards, who had long terrorized the Papal States, now faced the might of a warrior king who would not be denied. The siege of Pavia was brutal, a contest of wills that tested both sides to their limits. But Charlemagne did not falter. The city fell, its walls crumbling under the weight of his relentless advance. In 774, Charlemagne entered the halls of the defeated Lombard king, Desiderius, and with a single decree, the ancient kingdom of the Lombards ceased to exist. Crowned king of the Lombards, he did not merely claim a throne, he reshaped the balance of power in Europe. His alliance with the Pope deepened, binding the Frankish kingdom to the heart of Christendom itself. But the battle for dominance was far from over. Enemies lurked in the shadows, and the road to empire was paved with both glory and peril. It was a moment that would redefine the course of history. On Christmas Day, in the year 800, the grand halls of St. Peter's Basilica shimmered with candlelight as Charlemagne knelt before the Pope. The air was thick with anticipation, the weight of centuries pressing down upon the assembled crowd. And then, in an act that would send shockwaves through the world, Pope Leo III placed a crown upon Charlemagne's head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. But was this an honor or a trap? Would this newfound title bring unity, or would it paint a target on his back? The dawn of an empire had arrived, but the battle for its survival was only just beginning. The responsibilities of empire were vast, and Charlemagne would soon discover that ruling as emperor meant far more than conquest. It required wisdom, diplomacy, and the ability to hold together a fragile unity. The road ahead was fraught with challenges, and the legacy he sought to build was one that would define the very heart of Europe for centuries to come. Amidst the thunder of battle and the expansion of his empire, Charlemagne faced a different kind of war, one for the soul of civilization itself. The Dark Ages had cast their shadow over Europe, and the once glorious flames of learning, wisdom, and art had flickered dangerously low. But within Charlemagne's vast empire, a quiet revolution was about to unfold, a renaissance that would transform the future of knowledge, art, and culture. At the heart of this transformation stood Charlemagne's insatiable thirst for knowledge. Though he had been raised as a warrior, he had seen the profound power of learning and faith to shape the destiny of empires. His reign was not only one of conquest, but also of preservation and revival. He understood the dangers of ignorance and the potential of a well-educated people. Thus, while his armies marched across Europe, his scholars pored over ancient texts, searched for forgotten wisdom, and revived the sacred and secular knowledge of the past. In 780, Charlemagne took a step that would forever alter the course of European history. He invited scholars, philosophers, and theologians from across his empire and beyond to his court in Aachen. These intellectuals, drawn from the corners of Europe, embarked on a monumental task: to reclaim the intellectual heritage of Rome, Greece, and the Bible itself. In this new court of learning, the emperor became both a patron and a pioneer of a cultural revival that would lay the foundations for the medieval world to come. But the stakes were high. In the halls of Aachen, the pursuit of knowledge wasn't just a noble endeavor, it was an act of defiance. The dark forces of illiteracy, superstition, and ignorance still loomed large. The ancient wisdom of the Romans had been lost to time, while the Catholic Church's power often clashed with intellectual pursuits. Yet Charlemagne was undeterred. He ordered the copying of classical works, preserved the texts of the ancients, and revived the study of Latin. His efforts were more than just scholarly. They were the foundation of a cultural rebirth. Charlemagne's most remarkable achievement, however, was the creation of the Carolingian minuscule, a revolutionary new script that would ignite the flames of learning across Europe. With its cleaner lines and more legible characters, it made the written word accessible to scholars in ways never before possible. This script, born from the emperor's own will, spread across the continent, transforming libraries, monasteries, and scribes into the keepers of knowledge. It was a symbol of a new age, one where knowledge no longer rested in the hands of a few but was shared across kingdoms. But the Carolingian Renaissance was not without its challenges. The empire itself was vast and diverse. Political and religious pressures from within and beyond threatened to undo the fragile unity Charlemagne had forged. Still, with each passing year, his efforts bore fruit. The once-forgotten libraries of the ancient world were being resurrected, and the first glimmers of the intellectual movements that would later define Europe, Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment, began to take shape. In the shadow of war, in the heart of his empire, Charlemagne was creating something far more enduring than an empire. He was creating a legacy that would endure for centuries. His quest for knowledge was not just an intellectual pursuit. It was a desperate need to preserve the soul of his people, to secure an enlightened future, and to ensure that the flame of wisdom would never again flicker out. The year was 793 A.D., and the coastal monasteries of England were about to witness a horror unlike anything they had ever known. On a dark, storm-swept night, the savage howls of invaders filled the air, and the unforgiving waves crashed against the shores. It was not just an attack. It was the beginning of a relentless storm that would sweep across the lands of Charlemagne's empire and change the course of European history forever. The Northmen, the Vikings, had arrived. From the icy fjords of Scandinavia came the longships, sleek and fast, slicing through the waters like predators on the hunt. The monks at Lindisfarne, alone and vulnerable in their ancient sanctuary, never stood a chance. With the speed of a thunderclap, the Vikings descended upon them, warriors with faces painted in bloodlust and hearts as cold as the northern seas. Their axes bit into stone, their swords sang with the fury of the gods. The monastery, a symbol of peace and learning, was reduced to ash in a matter of hours. But this was only the beginning. Charlemagne's empire, already sprawling across much of Western Europe, now found itself facing a new and terrifying adversary. The Viking raids, unpredictable and savage, came like a plague, appearing without warning, striking where they were least expected. For every coastal town and monastery sacked, for every river they navigated with terrifying ease, Charlemagne knew that the foundations of his empire were being rattled by a force more primal than anything he had ever encountered. But who were these men, these relentless raiders from the frozen north? What drove them to such ferocity? Were they mere barbarians, or was there something more behind their fury? The answer was not simple, nor was it comforting. The Vikings were not just a loose band of marauding warriors. They were a formidable force bound by a common purpose: the search for glory, wealth, and an escape from the harsh realities of their homeland. In their wake, they left nothing but fear, death, and destruction, their legend growing with every successful raid. Charlemagne's Frankish armies were powerful, but these invaders were different, smarter, faster, and capable of striking where no one dared to follow. The raids seemed to grow bolder by the year. In 800, as Charlemagne's empire stood at its height, the Vikings sailed down the rivers of France and Germany with increasing frequency, their ships cutting through the waters like phantom shadows. In the heart of Charlemagne's own lands, the first signs of Viking plunder could be felt. Towns burned, villages were emptied, and the once proud Frankish defenses were stretched to their limits. It was a war not of traditional battles, but of terror, a war where no walls were high enough, no fortresses strong enough, and no leader wise enough to anticipate the next strike. Each Viking ship that appeared over the horizon was a reminder of the unpredictable fury of the Northmen, a reminder that even the mightiest empire could be brought to its knees by the forces of nature and the unpredictable power of men who feared nothing. Charlemagne, the great emperor, was not one to back down easily. He understood that this new threat would require more than just military might. It would require strategy, innovation, and alliances. He reinforced his coastal defenses, bolstered his navy, and forged alliances with other kingdoms, all in a desperate bid to slow the Viking tide. Yet, even Charlemagne could not completely tame the Northmen's fury. And then, in a twist of fate that would echo through history, something unexpected occurred. As the raids grew bolder, the Vikings themselves began to change. The same men who had once ravaged the lands of Charlemagne and his neighbors now began to settle, to claim territories, to build kingdoms of their own. In the east, the famous Viking chieftain Rurik established a dynasty that would one day give rise to the Russian Empire. In the west, the Vikings forged their own realms, ultimately establishing the Kingdom of Normandy in northern France. The once predatory force that had terrorized Charlemagne's empire was now slowly becoming a part of the European tapestry. The fierce warriors who had once laid waste to the lands of Christendom were now staking their claim as rulers, forging new dynasties, and shifting the balance of power forever. But even as the Vikings began to settle, the legend of their fury endured. Charlemagne's empire may have survived the Viking raids, but the world he had known was forever changed. The Northmen had carved their mark upon Europe, and no one, least of all Charlemagne, could ever forget the fury of the Viking threat. As the dust of history settles, Charlemagne's empire remains a colossal testament to the power of vision and ambition. From humble beginnings to the creation of an empire that reshaped Europe, his story is one of triumph, betrayal, and legacy. But in the end, as the great emperor passed from the world, a question lingered. Could Charlemagne's dream of a united Christendom ever truly endure? Could any empire of such vast ambition withstand the tests of time, division, and betrayal? Charlemagne's death sparked a chain of events that would echo through the centuries, changing the course of European history forever. His empire, built on the foundations of war, faith, and intellect, began to unravel in the wake of his passing. But as the world moved on, his legend endured, spoken of in whispers, written in the annals of time, and celebrated in stories across generations. So, what remains of Charlemagne's empire today? And what can we learn from the rise and fall of one of history's greatest rulers? Was his reign truly the dawn of a new age, or was it merely a fleeting moment in the grand tapestry of history? The answers lie hidden within the echoes of time, waiting for those daring enough to seek them. For the empire may have fallen, but the legend of Charlemagne, that, it seems, will never fade.